Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding and I'm an author, and I also run the centre. Today I'm joined by a very good friend to us, Lucy Strange, who not only does she help us all teach creative writing on our online fantasy course, she's also an author. And today we're going to be talking about writing historical fantasies, that blend of the fantasy genre with historical fiction. So Lucy, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to being an author?
Hi, hello Julia. Hello everyone, lovely to be here. I'm not really sure where to start. I start at the beginning that I've always been just a lover of stories, of all sorts of stories. And when I started thinking about talking to you today and talking about fantasy, and I write particularly children's literature, or fantasy, magical realism, that kind of that sort of thing, but aimed at kind of 9, 10 and up, that sort of thing. Anyway, I started thinking about children's literature and how a lot of children's literature has fantasy in it that we'd never even think of as describing as fantasy. I was thinking of like the Magic Faraway Tree and some of these sort of classic stories I used to read when I was little. Anyway, so I always loved stories, never really thought of being a writer particularly, mainly because all the writers that I loved as a youngster were all dead. So I sort of thought, and I appreciate this makes no sense whatsoever, that to be a writer you had to kind of be dead and somehow exist only in the past, and as a career option that didn't really appeal. So I just devoured books for a very, very long time. I trained as an actor. I studied English literature at university, then trained as an actor, worked as an actor for a few years. Did some singing as well, and then retrained as a secondary school English teacher, and I did that for 15 years. And so it's with hindsight now that I'm writing full time professionally, I look back on all of those things that I did, and I think actually it was always there. It was always about stories, always about a love of stories. My teaching literature, being an actor, being a performer for me was always about loving the creativity of the rehearsal process and the dynamics between the characters and the nuances in the language and all of that sort of thing. I didn't actually enjoy the performance aspect of it as much as I did the rehearsing. So then about 2014, I started writing. 2013, 2014, I started writing properly, having not really written much at all, apart from some really bad poetry as a teenager, which I think it's a rite of passage for everyone.
Yeah, necessary thing to do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I started writing. I did a bit of journalism. I started writing a blog, and I was living abroad at the time. I was living in the Middle East, and I was really, really homesick. And I think I probably, on reflection, started writing as a way of channeling a lot of these feelings that I was having, a missing home, a sense of nostalgia and a sense of loss for something. And I started writing what actually ended up being my first book, The Secret of Nightingale Wood. I entered the first few chapters in a competition and got an agent through that, and then got my first publishing deal through that. But fantasy, I suppose, is something that we often think of in terms of perhaps the more escapist end of literature, and so I think it's quite interesting that when I started writing, it was about escape. It was about escaping where I was physically, geographically, and wanting to be somewhere else.
That's a really interesting theme, this idea of escaping, because I think there's also an element of escaping to the past when you go and pick up a straight historical book, that you can spend time living back in an era that's already happened. You know the end of the story if you're sticking to real history. So it's perhaps unfair to say that fantasy is the only escapist genre, isn't it? Because I think mind you, that you could say that making up a story in our contemporary world is equally you're escaping your quotidian, your everyday existence.
Yeah. No,
On the
absolutely.
other, so it is funny how people say, "Oh, you're escape into fantasy." I think we just escape into fiction.
We do escape. We do, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's true of fantasy, and that's true of historical stories as well, is that because we've got a bit of a remove from our everyday world, it allows us to actually talk about a lot of things that are very, very now and very, very relevant. But we've got that sort of that veil of fantasy, or we've got that distance because of the history that allows us to deal with things in a way that's a little, perhaps just a bit more gentle or subtle, rather than kind of hitting it head on with a very sort of contemporary story.
So tell us a little bit about your latest books, what they're about, and what subject matters you've covered.
Oh, okay, well, it's often only when you talk about your books that you realise what they're about. I don't know if you have that.
Yeah, you have to suddenly sound very sort of tidied up about your thoughts, don't you?
Yeah. So my books they're not a series. They're all separate standalone stories. But they do have a few things in common. So The Secret of Nightingale Wood was my first one. That's set in 1919, just after the First World War. It's very much a sort of historical story, but it's got a lot of fairy tale in it. Our Castle by the Sea is my second book. That's probably the most historical. It's set in the beginning of the Second World War. And in this one, there is a magical element of an ancient myth about these standing stones on the cliff top here, that our heroine believes in this myth. She believes it's completely true. So all my stories set in the past, all of them have got that bit of magic, that bit of fantasy kind of bubbling away beneath the surface. The Ghost of Goswater is my third book. It's a sort of gothic mystery story set in the Lake District at the turn of the century, the year 1899 into 1900. And this one is probably my most sort of classically influenced ones. There's a lot of Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre and that sort of thing in there. So my two most recent ones, these have come out within a few months of each other. So it's all been crazy, but crazy here. So Sisters of the Lost Marsh, this came out in November. It's the only book I've written that is set. It is set in the past, but it's a non-specific past. It's got the feeling of it just sort of being perhaps sort of a no-when, but it's a pre-industrial, very sort of isolated, very rural community, and it's got that feeling of a little bit of a fairy tale world about it. There's a lot of fantasy via kind of folklore. Is that sort of feeling about Sisters of the Lost Marsh? Ancient curses and superstitions, that sort of thing. I might read you a little bit of this actually in a bit. And then my most recent book, The Mermaid in the Mill Pond, is probably my most straightforward combination of historical and fantasy. So this is an Industrial Revolution story. It's a novella, really. It's for a British publisher called Barrington Stoke, who writes stories specifically accessible for people who are dyslexic, who struggle to get into books, or reluctant readers, that sort of thing. So I think they're really cleverly designed, by the way. Not to make this a plug, particularly for Barrington Stoke, but I do think they're amazing. So they're printed on off-white paper. There's lots of illustrations throughout them, and the font, the language edits, everything is really, really sort of carefully put together to make sure they're really accessible. So it's set in England during the Industrial Revolution, and it's about a girl called Bess who escapes, or thinks she's escaping, from a London workhouse around about the year 1800, and has been offered the prospect of being a pauper apprentice at a cotton mill in the Midlands. And in it is not what she thinks it will be, and essentially she's sort of signed up to kind of a slavery, working in this cotton mill. And to contain the youngsters who are enslaved at the cotton mill, they're told this sort of terrifying story that there's a bloodthirsty mermaid that lives in the mill pond, and if they try to escape, she will get them. And it works as I suppose as a metaphor, because it's very much about freedom, and so I don't want to give too much away, but we have Bess trapped, enslaved in the mill, and then we have this mermaid character, and that ambiguity at first: is it real? Is it a myth? Is it just there to terrify the children? But the sense of a beautiful, powerful, fierce creature being trapped, and the idea of a mermaid trapped in a mill pond, this small bit of water contained by the weir that she can't get out of. And freedom. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, that story made me think of a story which I suppose is now a historical fantasy, though maybe it was contemporary at the time. Is the Charles Kingsley Water Babies, which, if people don't know, is a very intriguing Victorian story about a chimney sweep who gets turned into a water baby. It's written by it's a religious story. It has a lot of, sort of moral lessons. There are two very scary people under the sea. One scary, one nice. Mrs. Do as you would be done by, and Mrs. Done by as you did. The second one obviously punishes you, and the first one is all cuddly. I remember vividly reading a version of this with, I think it was Lucy Mabel Atwell illustrations. So illustrations are really part of that reading experience. Were you aware of the antecedents to your story when you wrote it, or is that something you've found out since?
No, I think having been a bookworm and an English teacher, I think all of this stuff is, and it's not always conscious. You're right; it's not always consciously there, but it's all in there, isn't it? And it all kind of comes through. A lot of my books have got quite obvious sort of intertextuality, and the placings of those well-loved stories are very clearly there. So in Nightingale Wood, for example, the main character is a bookworm, and she talks about a lot of her favourite books, the books she's reading. She's reading Little Women and that sort of thing. And a lot of the books and the fairy tales that are part of the story are flagged up within the story itself. But it's not always obvious. It's not always obvious to us as we're writing, is it? The influences that we have. So I didn't think particularly of the Water Babies when I was writing this one. I did think of there's a Grimm, one of the lesser known Grimm brothers fairy tales, the Nixie in the Mill Pond, and so that's something that I was aware of. It's a very different sort of story, but it's the concept of this supernatural creature in a very, I suppose, an industrial or a very everyday sort of a place. And also that there's a very odd little poem. This influenced Sisters of the Lost Marsh, actually. Do you know Overheard on a Salt Marsh, that poem by Harold Munro, they have a little goblin?
I only know it because you told us already on our writing course about this poem. So you introduced me to it.
It's so weird. So we have a little goblin talking to a nymph and begging for her glass beads. But the thing I love best about it is the title. It's called Overheard on a Salt Marsh. So and the whole poem is just the dialogue between the goblin and the nymph. But it's overheard. So then it implies, obviously, that the poet or the writer, someone was there and they heard this, and and then immediately it creates a whole story, a whole possible story surrounding that. But anyway, it's an example of how sometimes we're aware of our influences and they shape us and they shape our work. But sometimes things just sort of seep through, don't they? And we barely know it.
So you can have something like a mermaid in a mill pond or a water baby, and each age, the metaphoric, symbolic use of it is very different. So you were talking about freedom and the sort of
captivity and cruelty.
I suppose, in a sense, an anti-industrial revolution conditions of work story. The Water Babies did have an anti-chimney sweep, performing the
and child labour, but
it also had a very strong sort of baptismal, almost death metaphor running through it. Which
there's a lot of other quite unpleasant stuff in it as well. I think
I didn't notice that as a child. I just kind of read it, But now I look at it and think, oh dear, this is all a bit. Anyway, let the past be the past. We can't tidy it up. But just thinking about this issue of writing historical fantasies, I would absolutely love to hear you read some of your work, but we can have that as like story time a little bit further on. But I wanted to ask you about what you admire in other people's historical fantasies. I was just thinking of the ones that I've come across sort of were in my mind. There's things like Outlander, which has made it onto screen, and the discovery of witches, which has a sort of time travel aspect to it as well. And then there's I've got to check. I've got the right. Is it? I always get this wrong. It's Jonathan Strange
and Mr. Norrell.
I always get that wrong.
That's a brilliant one, isn't it? So brilliant. Because it's a sort of it's a different version of the world we know, isn't it? It's exactly like the world we know, except for the magic, and it's so clever.
I've just read Piranesi, which is
I really want to read that.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I
so many amazing things about it.
I preferred Piranesi in that for me it was is a lot shorter, which helped because I found the long read. You have to really invest in a world.
You have to commit. You do.
Yeah. Piranesi, I think, is sort of a step outside time, but it's in a historical place and it references historical events. So that's a very interesting use of historical fiction.
It's interesting. He's talking about time travel and time slips, because two of the books, I would say, from sort of the realm of classic children's fantasy, historical fantasy, that have influenced me would be Moondial, Helen Cresswell. I don't know if you know that. It's a lovely, very odd, about a girl who sort of a critical point in her life. I think her mother's in a coma or something like that. She's staying with an aunt. Always staying with an aunt. I've used that. Staying with irresponsible aunts who don't care where you go and what you get up to. She's staying with an aunt, and I think there's the grounds of a stately home, and there's a sort of she thinks it's a sundial, but it's not a sundial, it's a moondial, and the moondial has the power to transport her back in time, and she's there in this stately home as it was in its heyday, and she meets a child who's a servant there, and that's something. And
that sounds a bit like Tom's Midnight Garden.
Well, I was just going to say the other one is Tom's Midnight Garden, and both of them have the sense of I suppose that classic feeling to it, and because of the time slip, it is somehow timeless as well. It could be the modern day could be any time, and it doesn't matter where, if that's the 1960s or now. And Tom's Midnight Garden is lovely, isn't it? So that, for people who don't know, it's about a boy staying. He's been quarantined, hasn't he? He's been quarantined, I think, chickenpox or measles or something like that. And he's staying in a flat.
He's sent away because his brother has it.
That's it. I think that's it. Yeah. So he's staying
sent away.
Yeah. So again, he's staying with an aunt and uncle, I think, in a flat. And it's a
bigger house that's been converted.
That's right. It was a grand house that's now flats, and there's a little old lady who lives in the flat upstairs, and she's a bit mysterious, isn't she? And he can't sleep, and every night he starts creeping out into the garden, creeping outside, and it's unclear whether it's sleepwalking or if it's actually happening. And I love that ambiguity. By the way, it's something I'll come back to in a minute, because playing with ambiguity and is this real? Is it happening? Is it a dream? Is it a story within the story? That kind of thing. That's something I really love playing with in my work. So we're not sure what's happening, and he goes out and instead of that little sort of scrubby yard outside the back of the flats, it's transformed into beautiful gardens of the grand house that it once was, and he meets this little girl there, and they become friends. And the lovely twist of the story at the end, we find out that the girl.
You're spoiling the end.
Oh, but doesn't everyone know? But shall I not say?
No, you're allowed to say. It's been out for long enough.
When it's been out for a long time. So the little girl that he meets and becomes friends with is actually the past self of the old lady who lives in the flat upstairs, and it's all about her childhood and growing up in the house and and of course the lovely ambiguity is then, well, who's the ghost here? Is it him? Is he the ghost in her past, right, or is she the ghost in his present? And it's really, it's really magical. And a brilliant concept, isn't it?
It's Philippa Pierce.
Yeah. And the Moondial is Helen Cresswell. Yeah.
The detail in that, which I love in Tom's Midnight Garden, is the clock strikes 13.
Yeah.
Which is just a very simple idea, but that's what I remember. The clock strikes 13 and then the world sort of melts and becomes this other.
That's it. Yeah. That's it.
Very powerful.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So
go on.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned earlier that doing fantasy, but doing historical fantasies allows us to deal with subjects in a sort of sideways look at them. What subjects we've mentioned the Industrial Revolution, but in the Sisters of the Lost Marsh, for example, what subjects are you dealing with there?
Well, there's a strong kind of feminist theme in Sisters of the Lost Marsh. So the girls grow up in a very, very superstitious society ruled by superstition. In their village, reading and writing are seen as a sort of witchcraft. So people are very, very suspicious of you. So they have to keep it a secret that their Grammy has taught them to read and write. And she has a little secret library hidden away in her room in the house, in the farmhouse. And they live with her and their father, who's a very unpleasant, embittered sort of a character. And we sort of find out a bit more about his backstory later on. But one of the superstitions in this community that they've grown up with is the curse of 6 daughters. And it goes like this. Be sure the first girl marries well, a second in the home to dwell. A third maid can do little harm if set to work upon the farm. 4 and 5 must both be wed, or 6 will bury you stone dead. So Willa and her 5 sisters have grown up. Sorry?
I shouldn't laugh. It sounds very grim.
It is grim, but
it's a nice poem. Those adolescent poems were worth it.
Oh, there you go. Thanks. all that morbid love poetry. So they've grown up under the shadow of this curse, and they're with the father who fears and despises his own daughters because of this curse, which he absolutely believes in. And it's about this idea of within this bubble of a sort of a fantasy version of our world. It's about identity and for young people being able to choose who they are and who they want to be and what they do with themselves, what they do with their lives. There's and obviously not just girls here, but there is a feminist theme in there as well. The idea of girls being property of the father and to be married off, and a lot of. I suppose, but Willa describes it as her choices have already. She feels like her choices have already been chosen, and and I think it depends on where we're talking about in the world today. Within some parts of the world, within some cultures, these things are still horribly relevant. But even for the children, I was a teacher before I took up full-time writing, but even for those children who we would think of as growing up relatively free from these sorts of things, the pressures on them are still extraordinary, and pressures not just from families and parents, from society and from these days social media, all these sorts of things. So it's a big picture, and it's about having the confidence to find out who you are and to choose and to make your own choices. It's kind of at the heart of that one.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways of understanding our present is to look for patterns of behavior that were similar in the past. And one of the ones on social media that strike me is actually from Jane Austen. When Lydia elopes,
yes,
sisters, and it's like a scandal. It's like one faux pas means that
that's it. She's out.
The family is disgraced, and it reminds me of those things on social media where you do one posting that's a bit cruel, or something comes up in the past, or you did one unwise gesture, whatever it is, and that's it. You can't
that
get
idea of being cancelled. Yeah.
So we need to find an intelligent way of dealing with the fact that we are flawed human beings. We make mistakes and unwise choices. The hushing up for Lydia is not very satisfactory, because she ends up having to marry she, you don't think she's going to have a very happy marriage. No. But it seems very similar to what happens when someone's reputation has really been gone through the ringer. And
no, they definitely are.
They're completely different examples coming from different set of social understandings, and but they have a very similar effect. And that's what I think history helps us see.
Yeah, I think so. I was just going to it made me think of what you were saying about history. My second book, Our Castle by the Sea, is about what happened to the enemy aliens, as we called them. So about 80,000 or so people from Germany and Austria and Italy as well, who'd come to the UK as refugees to be safe. The vast majority of them were refugees at the beginning of the Second World War, and we locked them up in internment camps because Churchill famously said, "Collar the lot," because there was hysteria. People were terrified of spies and all of this sort of thing. But there was an immense amount of fear, anger, hatred, prejudice that was tangled up in the ways in which these people were treated. And that was something when I was sort of doing my research for this book. This book was very much around Brexit time here in the UK when I was working on this book, and I was so appalled by the amount of fear and anger and I was seeing in the media and that sort of thing. So it was talking about the ways in which we view each other, the ways in which we talk about people from other countries or from other cultures within our own families, to our children, in the media, in politics, and in times of conflict as well, and how easy it seems to be for people to become the enemy, for an entire nation of people to become the enemy, rather than being able to sort of view individuals as individuals. And I was just really interested in how can we find compassion here? How can we find this ability to judge an individual as an individual and not as part of this huge, hated, homogenous kind of mass? So I was dealing with some issues that were really quite powerfully felt at the time. But then through the lens of this historical story.
So you mentioned you'd like to read us a little bit.
Oh.
Have you chosen a passage that you think you'd like us to listen to?
As we are very fantasy, I thought I would read to you the Tale of the Marsh King that's in Sisters of the Lost Marsh. So the girl's mother died, but she was able to read and write, and she has left her daughters a collection of stories that she's written, sort of fairy tales to do with the Lost Marsh where they all live, and this is the story of the Marsh King. And it's a story that takes on great sort of significance for Willa, our main character in the story. And I remember I was talking about ambiguity and how we're not sure, is the story real? Is the story kind of seeping into our character's world? So we've got, I won't I'm so tempted to tell you things, but I won't. I'll just share with you the story of the Marsh King. So Willa's reading this story to her three youngest sisters, the triplets, late one night, and she has to read it in secret, obviously, so their father doesn't hear. Just one story, I said, and you've all got to lie still as stone and close your eyes. 6 bright eyes snapped shut. Beware the dangers of the marsh, my darlings, I read, tilting the book into the candlelight so I could make out Mamma's faded, twisty letters. Beware the mire. Do not lose your way, and never let fear be your guide. Darcy nodded very seriously, her eyes shut tight. Many winters ago, an evil sprite roamed these marshes. He lured folk out into the mire with his will-o'-the-wisp lantern. The marsh folk were afraid of him, afraid that he would use his false flame to ensnare the souls of their loved ones and to steal their livestock. The evil sprite fed upon their fear. He grew fat and gleeful. He used folks' fears to control them, and the more frightened they were, the stronger he became. He built himself a strange little castle on the mire. He made himself a crown of bones, and he called himself the Marsh King. There were only 2 people who did not fear the Marsh King, 2 sisters called Gloria and Githa Greenwood. They wrote the Marsh King down in a book, all the wicked things he did and all his cruel tricks too, as a warning to others. The Marsh King found out about the book, and it was the first time he had ever known fear himself. He was afraid folk would hunt him down with torches and dogs, so he used his dark magic. He spread whispers that writing was witchcraft, that the Greenwood sisters were witches. He stirred up fear and suspicion until the villagers turned against the Greenwoods and burnt their farmhouse down. The book was destroyed in the blaze, and Gloria Greenwood was killed. But the Marsh King didn't stop there. He conjured curses and jinxes so that folk were too frightened to rise up against him. He whipped up superstitions which blew like dandelion seeds all over the lost marsh and took root wherever they fell. Fear flourished. Folk became afraid of everything, afraid of books and cleverness, magpies and black cats, blood moons, and even their own daughters. And in this way, the Marsh King ruled over people who were mere shadows of themselves, frightened and cowed. He druv them like sheep, and he druv them like cattle, and they did not question their own misery. Young Githa Greenwood was broken with grief after her sister's death. Folk called her the sundered soul. What's sundered, Willa? Sundered means she felt torn apart, ripped down the middle. She would sit night and day by her sister's grave up on the hill, gazing out towards the shadowy mire. Months passed. May blossomed and the corn grew tall. Hay swayed in the meadows ripe for scything. The days lengthened towards midsummer like a dog stretching in the afternoon sun, and the marshes shone like gold. On the night of the midsummer moon, Githa Greenwood set out onto the mire, heading straight towards the light of a mysterious lantern that flickered there. But Githa had a lantern of her own. She took out her little tin tinderbox and struck a bright, bright flame. Then, all alone, she walked into the darkness. And she was never seen again. Oh, did the Marsh King get her? Perhaps, but listen, the Marsh King was never seen again either, and it wasn't long before his castle crumbled down into the mire. Dead then, said Dee Dee. Good, nodded Dolly. Ah, defeated perhaps, but not dead, whispered Grammy's voice from the doorway. A magical being is not as easy to destroy as all that, especially one as cruel and cunning as the Marsh King.
Thank you. Imagine the round of applause from those.
I'm imagining.
Yeah. That's lovely. Thank you. So, in a way, you're writing sitting in a position because you're using myths and legends, which is quite close to a straightforward historical fantasy, historical novel, because of course our lives are woven in with story, and people and families have stories and the rest of it. So, do you see a difference between writing a sort of straightforward historical novel and a historical fantasy, or do you not even think about those terms when you start writing?
I don't really think in genre terms. I think because there's so much blurring between them anyway, isn't there? So I suppose this story has got more fantasy in it through folklore, but a lot of my stories, it's more teetering on the brink of kind of a magical realism where we have that sense of it. And I think this is something that history gives us, actually, which is one of the things I love about using a historical setting, because it makes it feel really real, really concrete and really real. If we've got the story set within the Second World War or set within the Industrial Revolution, it gives us this context, it gives us this like a kind of a backdrop on a stage. It makes us feel safe. We know where we are with this. We know a little bit about this time, and that, I think, makes it all the more fun when you bring in this element of the supernatural, this element of fantasy. And I think it just creates that eeriness and that moment in which we get that sort of shimmering between reality and fantasy. And I think it makes it all the more powerful. Actually, another writer I wanted to mention particularly is Frances Harding.
Oh, of course, yeah, The Lie Tree.
The Lie Tree,
yeah.
And Cuckoo Song, and these stories which use very, very real feeling historical settings. And then she takes it, I would say, further into the fantasy world than I do. But I never forget reading, I think Cuckoo Song was the first one of hers that I read. And I didn't really know what to expect. And I was just reading it, and I had that brilliant moment when I realized it was like a genre shift, and it was just like someone kind of whipping the rug out from beneath your feet, and you just everything. And I think when you get those moments in books where you actually exclaim out loud, I was just, wow, what is, and it was amazing. And I think she does that absolutely brilliantly. I
think the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell was like that. It was another book which had a sort of, you may be able to find other books beforehand, but suddenly there was other books like it that came on afterwards. Ways. Or remind us of things that have already existed.
Night Circus.
Night Circus. Who's that by?
Erin
Morganson.
Yes.
Yeah. Between us, we've got a Google brain. I read that recently, having sort of picked it up in an Oxfam shop. I think it was on my to read list, and I think I was surprised by quite how historically based it was. There's an element of sort of, is it that the film about the two contending magicians, The Prestige, I think it's called. There's an element of that.
That's good, isn't it? I love that.
Which I hadn't realised from the way it was packaged and the front cover. So if anyone else out there hasn't got around to it, I would highly recommend it. It's a really great read. Very much enjoyed it. Yeah.
Another one I thought of was The Miniaturist.
Yes.
Which is another book I really, really enjoyed. Although what I really, really wanted, I really wanted an answer with one of those books where the supernatural element of it is just left, and you're.
Do you know, I it's a bit naughty really, but my definition between a literary novel and everything else is literary novels don't give you answers.
No, I suppose. Well,
they like having these open-ended, slightly opaque.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Yeah, I quite like to know the answer too. Yeah. I'm just, that's a bit of a joke. That's not the only form of literary novel, but it does. I've just read a historical novel by a gentleman called Andrew Miller called "And Now We Shall Be Entirely Free," which equally ends on completely ambiguous. You don't know if they die. You don't know if they escape, and it's obviously on purpose and it's patterned. But part of me was thinking, I want to know, and you suppose you have to make up your own ending.
Yeah. But I do think there's a point at which I just go, no, that is just cowardly. Come on. You need
too far. You've gone too far.
Actually, do you know Sarah Waters' Little Stranger?
I haven't read it, but I've read quite a lot of Sarah Waters, but not that one.
Oh, I think she's fantastic and great at twists and so on. And Little Stranger is it's a ghost story, really. It's a ghost story, and it's about there's a almost kind of plausible sort of scientific explanation for the ghost within it, and it's a story that ends, and I think on first reading I thought, but how, but what happened, and it felt like it was all kind of, just hanging open at the end, and then going back to it afterwards, and I could see, like you talked about the patterning, and it's there, it's all there, all the answers are there in the story. But that's a brilliantly written historical, I suppose, historical ghost story / fantasy.
The Turn of the Screw is a bit like that as well, isn't it? It has that element of ambiguity about the status of the ghosts and who where they're coming from and what the role
making it seem like logical, I think, is the thing, isn't it? It makes sense.
And the Woman in Black, the more Susan Hill, not Sarah, Susan Hill. So that's perhaps I will come back to ghost stories in a future event, because I think the whole question of what you do with the supernatural if that sort is a fascinating subject, bigger than I think perhaps we've got time for now. But thinking about historical fantasy, and we always end where in all the fantasy worlds is the best place to be something. And because you've written a story about a mermaid in a mill pond, I thought I'd ask you, Lucy, if you had the choice of going into any of these fantasy worlds to be a mermaid, where would you choose to go?
Any of the fantasy worlds we've talked about today?
Oh, any, not just the ones we talked about today, any of them. I've got some I wouldn't want to go to, which are far too polluted and sort of wouldn't last long as a mermaid.
Bizarrely, the first one that sprang to mind was Narnia, but that'd be freezing, wouldn't it?
They do have mermaids in Narnia. On the voyage of the Dawn, on the voyage of the Dawn Treader, as they go further west, it becomes a bit like the Indian Ocean. It's like crystal blue water, and Lucy looks over the side and sees the mer people down below. So, and the water's sweet. So I think that's probably okay.
We'll go with that. So the bit that's not cursed with the eternal winter, we'll go.
It's after the spell's broken. We never got the answer as to whether or not the rest of Narnia was under, like the bits that aren't Narnia, the other bits, were they under the same spell?
That's all affected.
I'll have to ask an expert. I'll find out. I think for me, I know the one that I wouldn't want to be in, which is Netherland, because the mermaids in that have always annoyed me, because they're written to be a bit jealous, and
there's a crocodile as well.
And there's a crocodile. So it seems quite a small place as well.
Yeah.
So
I definitely wouldn't want to be in the mill pond. That's for sure.
So that's out. So I think the best place to be a mermaid for me would be to be in the world of what's that Marvel? It's DC, Aquaman.
Yeah,
you get cool outfits. You've got Jason Momoa swimming around.
Yeah,
it's actually one of the funniest films if you start analysing it. Right at the end of Aquaman, Nicole Kidman, his mother, sort of suddenly appears after the big battle. She suddenly appears in a very posh frock, and everyone else has been slugging it out. There's some moments which are unintentionally funny. And Julie Andrews appears as a great sea monster in it.
Amazing. So, this sounds fantastic. I'm going to have to watch this.
It's going to be just for the comedy value as well as the vastness of the world. I think I'd be a mermaid in the world of Aquaman. Yeah,
okay. I was just thinking, actually, Game of Thrones-y kind of... What's the Mediterranean? Is it King's Landing? Is that the Mediterranean-y bit in Game of Thrones? I think that's sort of... Yeah, somewhere... I mean, basically, I'm just going somewhere warm...
it's fairly suicidal. But isn't it fairly suicidal to enter the world of Game of Thrones?
It wouldn't end well.
You'd be hunted by some ghastly people from somewhere, or dragons or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, but these are fun little tangents to think about, and it's from these kind of tangents from where next ideas come from. So who knows? I think your Caribbean mermaid story is on the way. Thanks very much for being with us, Lucy, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers Podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.